Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. So in this video, I'm going to address the atheists or the agnostics who try to use the Turkish earthquake to undermine God's existence. These atheists are like a bunch of leeches, blood-sucking leeches that is. They hang on to the opportunity and suck the juices out of a situation in order to play with your emotions, to disprove to you the existence of God. But you see, these atheists, whenever something bad happens, they're always there to discredit God and blame God for it. But when good happens, they never point the finger to God and say, oh, it was because of God. For example, after 106 hours, that's more than 5 days, a baby was pulled out of rubble. It was saved by a miracle, by God's protection. But the atheists never point to God and say, look, this is God's amazing work. No, instead, they would say, oh, that was just a coincidence. That was just a freak of nature. So notice, when bad things happen, it's God's fault. When good things happen, that was just a coincidence, which is really the double standards and the inconsistencies and the biases of their argument. We've all witnessed the horror that has come out of this. It is significant at a great scale, but we need to keep in mind that we've said this many, many times, that this dunya, this earth that Allah has created, He's created it to test humankind. Who are the righteous, who will turn away and dispute God's existence. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Part of the test, part of being part of this earth, is to accept the good and the bad. That's what a trial is. That's what a test is. See, these atheists are so deluded that they think that when a calamity happens, they can accept that bad people or evil people get killed and they suffer, but they say that, no, what about the vulnerable? What about the innocent? What about, those innocent children? What did they do to deserve this? And again, they don't understand the faculty. They can't comprehend the faculty of the test. And that is that if God Almighty saved all of the innocent children in this, every single innocent child that was stuck under that rubble, under all of those buildings, if they were all stuck there and they were all rescued, then there'd be no test. The test would be over. God's existence, the dispute of His existence will be over, right? Everyone would believe. But that is as if God has revealed Himself to you. That defeats the purpose of the test. If God comes down and shows Himself to you, then there'd be no test. Everyone would be a believer. Every single person would believe it. Every single person would do righteous deeds. Every single person would pray. Every single person would become a Muslim straight away, right? So there'd be no test. Everyone will be a believer. The fact that God does not show Himself and He sends revelation and prophets, He's testing to see whether you believe in the unseen. God wants you to believe in the unseen. But if He reveals Himself, everyone will believe. The test would be over. It is absolutely tragic that these children get killed, but God understands the bigger plan. Do you know, even from a psychological point of view, do you know what makes human beings actually move? When they actually see babies being killed or trapped under rubble, it hits our emotions a lot more. right? So, for example, Allah may allow babies being trapped or killed under rubble to make you move, right? Let me give you an example. You've watched all of the footage of people being rescued and saved. When a person at the age of 25 or 27 or 30 gets saved, you see the emotions of people are pretty ecstatic. I mean, they're happy. They're like, oh, wow, look, cool. We just saved a middle-aged or a young male, right? But when babies get saved, my God, you see the tears. You see there is so much more excitement saying, look at this vulnerable child has been saved. And so what happens is people tend to get moved by it more, right? So what happens is Allah wants humans to be charitable, to be helpful. It could be that the reason why Allah allows buildings to collapse on babies and children is to see and encourage you to be more charitable. Because human beings, they move. They're impaired to, their emotions are impaired to the most vulnerable. So it gets them off their backside to go and help and do something. Whether it's raising funds or raising money or going out and doing charitable things. Can you imagine if only old people, say only 80 or 70-year-old people or 90-year-old people closer to their death majority of them started dying in the buildings only. Would anyone really move? They'd be like, oh yeah, these people are almost at the end of their age anyway. It wouldn't really, you would sympathize, don't get me wrong, you'd be emotional, you'd be sad for them and so forth, but there wouldn't be a real trigger point to make you move. But when you see babies and the most vulnerable and people at a very young age who haven't really been given an opportunity at life going through suffering, it makes you move more. And possibly that is probably the wisdom why Allah allows babies to suffer and small children to suffer in those circumstances. To test you, to see if you're going to get up and really do something. And it is a greater test now. It is a greater trial now, because if you're not moving your backside for the most vulnerable, imagine how that reflects on your character. So Allah is testing your character here. Allah is testing what type of a human being you are. That forget that you're not moving for the elderly, you're not even moving for those small young children. So as you're pointing a finger to Allah, you have three fingers pointing back at you. Of course, other Muslim theologians have given other examples, such as we may not understand why children get killed and so forth. Of course, there is the story that Yasir Qadi, he also made a video on this subject, and he brought that up, where with Khidr alayhi salam, where when the angel came down, they went and killed that child, and everyone perceived Musa alayhi salam, for example, he perceived how could this how could Khidr and so forth, how could they kill this child and so forth? But then they later found out that this child was going to cause so much misery for their parents when he gets older, that it's going to be so unbearable that it'd be better to remove that child from the mother and father's life. And they give examples of that. So Allah Alam, there could be that sort of wisdom of why God allows certain children to be killed in the earthquake. And of course, we also need to consider that this world is a test, and it doesn't matter whether people are killed in this earth, especially if they're children, because there's going to be an afterlife, and Allah is going to reward them with paradise. See, if you believed in the atheist ideology and the mentality, those children, when they're killed, according to their view of natural disaster, what happens in the afterlife? The children get nothing. There is no reward. There is no paradise. There is no heaven. So under Islamic theology, we believe that if you are a child and you die, you go directly to Jannah, you go directly to heaven. So when they criticize Allah and say, oh, he's not merciful, or he's intolerant, or he allows babies to die, but then in our Islamic belief, we believe that there's a Jannah, Allah's going to reward. They criticize Allah for this, for Allah allowing these babies to die. They're criticizing Allah for then allowing these babies to go to heaven, right? But then their own philosophy, their own ideas, their own atheistic worldview says, in a natural catastrophe, those babies die, there is no afterlife, there is no heaven, there is no reward for these babies. So I ask these atheists or agnostics, how do you criticize Allah for being unjust when Allah rewards these babies with paradise, when in your own worldview there is no afterlife, there is no heaven, there is no reward and recompense for the suffering of what these children went through? So you are the last people on the earth to criticize God, Allah, and religion. Also, I'd like to address the point about, oh, these innocent people are being killed, these women and men, these families, they don't look like terrorists or evil people or criminals and so forth. And here's the question, what happened to the saying of only Allah should judge, only God should judge? How do you know who is good and who is bad? How do you know who is good and bad? Our Islamic definition is that, for instance, according to God's understanding of good and evil and so forth, suppose a person doesn't pray. Is there a number on those who, is there a number saying that this person prays or that person doesn't pray? How do we know who prays and who doesn't pray? So how do you define who is good and who is bad? So suppose Allah maybe kills those in the earthquake, those who don't pray. You don't know. Allah is the judge. Allah knows the affairs. That's exactly what I'm saying. So Allah knows the affairs. Allah knows who is good and who is bad. There are some Muslims out there, and this is some prominent Muslim speakers. There's Nauman Ali Khan and there's Mufti Menk and so forth. They, for instance, say, we shouldn't be saying that this is the punishment of God. This isn't the punishment of God. What I say in return is, how do you know? How can you be so sure that this isn't the wrath or the punishment of God? You shouldn't be deciding this. Only Allah knows. Right? It could be the wrath of God. It could be the punishment of God. But just because an earthquake happens, it doesn't mean they're all under the punishment of God. Let me repeat this. When an earthquake happens and all these people get killed, it doesn't mean that they are all under the punishment of God. Because we know that there are hadiths that say when a building falls upon a person and he dies, then he becomes a shaheed, a martyr. There you go. So yes, the earthquake may come as a punishment, but if there are believers amongst them and they do their salah and they pray and they devoutly worship Allah and they are killed in this, it doesn't mean that they are also under the wrath of God. Allah could be removing them and rewarding them as being martyrs and shaheed amongst those who have been killed under the wrath of God. There are many valuable lessons that come out of this. Many valuable lessons that come out of this. And I'll actually go through them more. The atheist concept is, this has got nothing to do with God. This area was situated on a tectonic plate. It was inevitable. This was something that was going to happen. People were supposed to get killed anyway. And this has got nothing to do with God. This is really a bunch of nonsense of an argument. Just an example, okay? This globe, this earth is, what is it? Is it covered by, I don't know, is it 80% or 9% or 70% of water? Okay, water can. I'm talking about seawater, ocean water. Ocean water can be very, very dangerous. Okay, it is inevitable that if we go out into the sea and we don't take our precautions, we could die. It's an alarm. It's a time bomb ready to go off. Okay, now this doesn't mean that because God created nature and nature has risky elements to it, it doesn't mean that the life and death is not instrumented by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You could sit in your home and, the human body could get a heart attack, right? You don't have to be a certain age to get a heart attack. There are children who have had heart attacks. There are teenagers who have died from a sudden heart attack or a seizure or a blood clot. Okay? So you don't have to be an old person to have a heart attack or a blood clot and so forth. So it's inconsistent for you to say it's inevitable. Turkey is in a risky area. That area is in a risky situation. An earthquake is supposed to happen anyway. Earthquake doesn't have to always happen. Or if it happens, Allah could draw down the severity. Or Allah could create or put wisdom into the design of engineers to withstand those buildings against such earthquake. All of the power and wisdom is behind Allah. And Allah can use the natural disorder of the earth, say hurricanes, tornadoes, cyclones, earthquakes. He could even use hail. He could use the natural elements to push the wrath of God upon those human beings. So if you're living, for example, in America, in Texas City, in Tornado Alley, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He could use the natural elements there to use that wrath against certain human beings He dislikes. Similarly, God could have used other elements to kill the people of the earthquake's vicinity, which is Antakya and Adana and so forth. He could have used, for example, terrorists to come in there and blow themselves up in marketplaces, because it actually borders northern Syria. He could have used those means. He could have allowed those means to kill other human beings. He could have allowed a fire to happen. He could have allowed a disease to spread in the area. But instead of doing those things, He said, well, this place sits on a fault line anyway. I might as well just use the fault line to my advantage and use the fault line destruction to kill these human beings. Right? We have a lot of bushfires in Australia. We don't really have much earthquakes. Allah could say, I'm going to use bushfires in order to show my wrath and kill human beings. Allah can use the natural elements, the elements of a disorder. He could use those elements to target certain people based on their geographic location. But there are many wisdoms that come out of this. We shouldn't always think that this is bad or evil, because Allah understands the greater wisdom behind this. Just an example, there was a story, and I'll put it as a hyperlink below this video. It is in Turkish, unfortunately. It's a true story, but I will actually translate it to you in English because most of this stuff is in Turkish. So what happened was, in one of these apartments, there was an individual who basically lost, he was working in the army, and he had a family and children. And so what happened is, in one of these apartments that actually went down, and all these people got killed. So, so basically he was working for the Turkish Armed Forces. He had 2 small children, and so forth. And so what happened is, his landlord, who was living on the top part of the apartment, raised the price of rent. And so this soldier went up to the landlord who was living on the top part of the apartment and said, look, please don't raise the rent price. I have small children, I have a wife and so forth. Can you just give me enough time so I can get a better job? Please, we're going to end up on the streets. Don't raise our rent so high and so forth. And basically he was acting so arrogant. He was saying things like, either you pay this money or you and your family are on the streets. Just get out. So cut the long story short, what happened was this man had to move out and find himself another apartment. And he was lucky to find another apartment and so forth. So what happened was this soldier gets a call from his landlord, crying his eyes out, saying, do you have a place for me to stay? I need your help. The building that I was in has completely collapsed. My children were saved, but my dear wife, she got killed in this. And so he's crying and explaining this story. And so the moral of the story is this: look, suppose what this man did by evicting this family and these children out of this house and raised the price and showed no mercy. Perhaps Allah in return punished him and showed no mercy to him and took his wife away from him. His entire building and assets got burnt and got taken away from him. All his money, all his earnings, all his wealth got taken away from him, and now he became subjugated to this man. Now he's looking for property and asking this man that he evicted, can you now shelter me? SubhanAllah. So everything has a valuable lesson. Everything that happens has a valuable lesson. Each individual circumstance is different. I remember when, Turkey, mashallah, they've done wonderful. They house more than 4 to 6 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. But what happened was, and I've seen this on social media many, many times, that the Turkish people, they started becoming very hostile towards the Syrians. There was a lot of racial sentiments. These people are coming here, taking our jobs. A lot of the racist sentiments or the Islamophobia that we may witness in Australia when Pauline Hanson, for example, says, stop the boats, we need to stop immigration, they're coming and taking our jobs. This racist slur, right? So unfortunately, the Turkish population fell into this. They were saying, the Syrians are coming here, committing crimes, they're raping girls, women and children, they're doing this, whatever. And they're trying to tarnish them, trying to stop Syrian immigration, sympathizing with them less, So subhanAllah, maybe Allah allowed this earthquake to happen at such a great scale, so now the Turkish people can actually sympathize with the traumas of what those poor old Syrians went through. We know, and we have seen the footage, how many Russian bombs, American bombs, Bashar al-Assad's bombs, barrel bombs. We know how they bombed those buildings, how they flattened those buildings. We know that they completely destroyed that city. We know how many children were stuck under those buildings and the world was silent. Right? Now Allah could probably say, look what happened to you now in Turkey. Look how I turned that place, Alanya, Adana, Hatay. Look how I now have turned that place into a Syria. Look at all your buildings. They look worse than Syria. Look at you now. So He can humble you. Bring rahmah back into your heart. So when tragedy really happens across the border, you can now sympathize better with those people and stop calling them criminals. Harbor them and look after them and be generous. Do not ever look down upon them. Do not look down upon those who suffered, because I will make you suffer. I will make you suffer. Don't ever think you are safe. Humble yourself before your Lord. Because the same fate that happened to them could happen to you. So don't you ever act arrogantly and start using racial slurs because they're Arabs or they're from a different country. They're your Muslim brothers and sisters. Humble yourself. Just as they were left homeless and exiled, I will leave you homeless as well. Another possible reason why Allah allowed these earthquakes to happen is because we know that there are lots of rich and fat tycoons, some of these criminal builders, and there is circulating information that the government is now prosecuting over 100 to 150 builders. Some of them were actually caught with $17,000 cash in their pockets trying to flee the country. They were caught at the airport last minute, and now they're being prosecuted and charged for trying to run away from the country because they broke building code procedures. Some of them had made under the table payments to corrupt surveyors and allowed certain breached certain building regulations. For example, they used cheap material to save on building costs in order to produce lots of buildings. They breached the building codes and used cheap material. And so now the Turkish government is going after some corrupt builders to see whether they have actually broken certain rules because of the amount of buildings that have gone down, somewhere between 5,000 to 6,000. Despite, I understand that the earthquake was at a huge, significant, great proportion. What was it? 7.8, and then it followed by a 7.5 earthquake. Despite the magnitude, experts are saying it still shouldn't costed over 6,000 buildings to fall. And so now the attention has been directed to these corrupt builders, and so now they are under questioning, and hopefully prosecutions will follow. So Allah is the greatest. Allah is the one who does certain things in order to expose corrupt builders who took haram money. They claim that these buildings are earthquake proof, so they actually go and raise the price of rent to say, look, we have authorization, we have earthquake building. So, the money that we're charging is justifiable, when in reality, it isn't earthquake proof. And they scammed the system, and they got these false accreditations in order to prove that their buildings are earthquake proof. And then they started taking haram money from the residents, from the tenants. And so what happened now is Allah removed those buildings, flattened those buildings to expose these corrupt builders. And now they're hopefully going to get punished. So like I said, when things happen, we don't see it as always bad. It's probably that Allah allows like certain evil or certain bad things in order for the greater good, And so now suppose that we're looking at this and saying, look, Allah allowed this to happen, but who knows, now Turkey will probably get its act together. The government will crack down harder on these corrupt builders, and hopefully now that that we go through this process, Turkey will start to develop and scrutinize the accreditations of these surveyors and builders a lot stronger, and the permits for these people will be a lot more difficult to get from now on whenever they try to construct a new building, which hopefully will now help Turkey advance and overcome another natural catastrophe that may happen in the future, with a lot more success and a lot less deaths and a lot less buildings falling down. So everything happens from Allah's wisdom. We may look at it as something evil and something bad, but Allah understands the greater good. And this isn't just for the corrupt building surveys. This could be for the people up ahead too. People like Erdogan, the government, and so forth. You know, they're going to also be scrutinized. They're not free from scrutiny as well. And I don't want to use this as like a political stunt, because we know that there's elections coming up, but fingers are going to be pointing everywhere. So perhaps Allah is teaching the Turkish government or is going to admonish the Turkish government to take into consideration and look after its people a lot better than it did before. Again, I'm not blaming the Turkish government. What I'm saying is they need to improve and have better mechanisms to surveillance these corrupt builders and not let it go so lightly. So hopefully moving forward, they'll have better checks and balances when it comes to licensing or allowing licenses to certain builders and surveyors, and make sure they check their accreditations more often than usual. So when these atheists point a finger at God and say, why does he allow this to happen? Allah could be helping the Muslims better regulate their own system and safety and welfare of people. So it's not always a bad thing that an earthquake happens and people die. When an earthquake happens or a natural disaster happens, it is a common knowledge or a common saying that when a natural catastrophe happens, it exposes the very good and the very evil of people. And we've seen this. For example, many lootings were happening. Stores were being robbed after the earthquake, where families going in there and stealing other people's goods. And we've seen many lootings happen. So has the earthquake proved a test? Has it exposed the evil in some people? Yes, they go out and start looting people. And there was a commentator in that video while he was exposing this saying, this is why Allah allowed it to happen. It allowed it to happen because, look, it's because of people like you, he allowed this to happen. It also exposes the evil in people. When we saw a lot of the Western nations, they failed to act really, really quickly. This was reported. You can see Western news media outlets who were there in Turkey, and they're saying we can hear babies screaming, we can hear children screaming, we can hear families under rubble stuck, and no one is here to help them. And I have documented it. You can see the hyperlinks below this video in the description section. You can see it for yourself. Over 100 hours later or 80 hours later, that was when Western nations were attempting to go there to save these people. And I'm thinking to myself, was it really a rescue mission, or was it a training expedition? I really couldn't understand it. So they will be judged on the Day of Judgment. They will be judged for this. If they could have got there quicker, but they refuse to because they're from a different race or because they're Muslim and so forth, they're going to be judged for their evil on the Day of Judgment. They were even making excuses such as, we couldn't really get our equipment there. Oh, we're sorry, we're late. I've got this. It's documented. I'll put the hyperlink below this here and you can see it for yourself. They're saying, we're sorry. It was very hard to get buses and transportation here. And I'm thinking to myself, what a bunch of nonsense. If there was oil there, if there was gold there, they would have been there the very next morning. The very next morning, they would have flied their planes. They would have used helicopters. They would have dropped their equipment there. No questions asked to pull out all that oil. Yeah, but when it comes to saving Muslim lives, we'll just procrastinate. Yeah, 1 day gone, 2 day gone, 3 day gone. Yeah, we'll show up on the 4th day, So like I said, when an earthquake happens, it exposes the evil of people. This is part of Allah's test. He sees the good in people and he sees the evil in people. The earthquake also exposes another beautiful test. The good in people, no matter how much calamity happens, no matter how much killings happen, no matter how much people see the destruction, wallahi, their iman, their belief in God strengthens more. They come closer to God because they understand that this world is only temporary and there is a bigger world, and this world is controlled by a bigger and higher power, and he can snatch away your life. And everyone gets humbled by this. And so they come closer to God. Because notice this atheist concept that, when suffering happens, when evil happens, all these people now start to become ex-Muslim. No, there are Muslims, there are believers, and there are people who didn't really pray or who didn't really believe. And their iman becomes more strengthened by this calamity. We know this because there was a case where a person was trapped under rubble, and he's asking those who are the rescue team, can you please give me some water? I want to take wudu. I want to do ablution, the purification, so I can pray. And you know what they're saying? You don't have to pray. You can delay it. You can join it. We just need you to come out. The guy doesn't want to come out. He wants to pray. This is an old man. I'll put the hyperlink below this video and you can see it for yourself. So according to the atheist logic, they should all just become disbelievers. No, when tragedy happens, people get attached more to their belief because their faith is in their belief, their trust is in their God, which exposes the atheist ideology of, it's great that tragedy happens because people become disbelievers. No, it's the total opposite. You can see even when people are trapped under the rubble, they're just praising God. They're just saying, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadan Rasulullah. They're constantly praising their Lord. They're constantly praising their God. Before, perhaps they weren't praising their God as often. One lady was saying that she was pleading, she was writing her last letter. She was saying, if I have a debt to anyone, can someone help me pay this person's debt? But probably when she was alive and there was nothing happening and her life was going beautiful and she was just watching her Netflix, she didn't care whether she had to pay someone's debt off. But as soon as she's in calamity, as soon as it's her last breath, now she suddenly wants to pay someone's debt off. So look how Allah brings the true Muslim out when he's in the state of almost losing his life. Makes them more humble, makes them more obedient to God. And it motivates a lot of Muslims because we think that our life could be snatched away from us right away. Like even with me personally, I try and pray my times much closer to the time. Whereas earlier I was delaying it more often. And now I'm thinking to myself, life is so short. I could have been in Alanya. I could have visited Adana. And you're thinking nothing was going to happen to me, and bang, suddenly earthquake, I'm dead, I'm stuck under rubble now. We think we're safe in Australia. We think death isn't going to come to us. But when you see things like this, it draws you closer to God because you think your life could be snatched away from you any minute. What have you prepared? How have you worshipped God? Have you delayed it? Have you occupied your mind with all these other things like video games, Netflix, or whatever else it is? So when calamity happens, it's not always a bad thing. It helps rejuvenate one's iman. So this again disproves the atheist, because when bad things happen, it also draws us closer to God. And of course, there are those who move away from God. I'm not disputing that, but that's their test. That's their test, because when bad things happen, Allah wants to see who draws closer and who removes himself. And if you've removed yourself, you've failed the test. If you've disbelieved in God, you've failed the test. So this is all part of the greater test. Honestly, as a Muslim, I didn't need to see the earthquake to be humbled. I didn't need to be reminded of this to strengthen my faith. But there are a lot of Muslims who do need that reminder to strengthen their faith. I've already seen the calamities in Syria and the calamities we see even in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, and even with the Palestinians or the Afghans. We've seen those calamities, but unfortunately the human nature is such that you give it a bit of time and human beings go back to forgetting the blessings of Allah, forgetting that He's given you life, He's given you this great life. He's made you forget about caring for the poor or the needy. So Allah allows continuously these calamities to happen, not because He hates you or He has a wrath against you and so forth. It's also to remind and strengthen you to do good, to constantly remind, because the human mind continuously forgets these favors. So Allah continuously sends calamities to draw you closer back to your roots, to worship God, to not waste your time and your life on video games and all these other things, to concentrate on the true purpose of life, to help the needy, no matter where they're from. Okay, just because they're from a particular ethnic race or a different religion or whatever it is, it doesn't mean you shouldn't help them. Because if you don't, then Allah will send the same wrath upon you. Okay, guys, I'm going to wrap it up from there. I hope you've taken some valuable lessons from there. Do not believe in the atheist ideology that wants to draw you away from God. Worship Allah, be sincere. Don't always look at the earthquake as a bad thing. There could be many positives. Just before I close the video, I do want to address a comment. This was published on France 24 English. And so what happened was a baby was saved after 104 hours, I believe, under rubble, which was an absolute miracle. M. Zakir Hussain Khan writes, "Only Almighty is the best protector indeed." So basically he's saying Allah is the best protector. Deborah, who seems to be an atheist, writes, "How can you say that with so many dead, thousands not protected?" My response to this atheist is, Allah, He is the protector. The fact that this baby survived over 5 days, despite thousands of deaths, is proof of that testament. Those that weren't protected were because God didn't choose to protect them. After all, He had other plans for them. For example, the Prophet said, "Those who die with a building falling on them become martyrs." This means God lifted His protection so that He may give them paradise, which is a better life. And there is also the wrath of God. He may also lift protection as a form of expressing His anger at others. Only God knows why He does things, and only God understands who deserves His protection, and in no way is He answerable to you and I. And you can see here, Turkey earthquake, young girl rescued after 178 hours under rubble. If that's not a miracle, what is? But the atheist would be so arrogant to say, this has nothing to do with God. Perhaps this baby had its mother to the very last minute. It was suckling. Perhaps it was early in the morning and it had lots of clothes because it was during that time where they were still sleeping. And, perhaps, there was, a warm fire next by because the building next door was burning and it produced a bit of heat. They want to neglect the fact that this happened in -2 degrees. right? And they want to ignore the fact that all this falling debris simply miraculously missed that child, you know. They want to ignore that, but they want to concentrate on, oh, it happened early mornings of the hour and this baby would have been clothed. Maybe it had a mother close by and it was suckling its mother till its very last stages and it allowed it to prolong 178 hours. See, they will always make these excuses to say it had nothing to do with God. But when an earthquake does happen and all these people die, they suddenly point the finger at God and say that was his fault. Which again is their hypocrisy. And it reminds me of the verses of the Quran which say, no matter how much evidence you show these atheists or these disbelievers, they will not believe. They are deaf, dumb and blind, and they will not come to guidance. And this is why Allah has prepared for them a painful doom for their lies and their arrogance. I'd like to mention, and this is the very last thing, is that, I'm sorry about this because as I'm thinking, it constantly just keeps coming to my mind. So the last point I'd like to make is, as tragic as it is, you know, we see children, babies being killed, as tragic as we may perceive it to be, Allah has the greater plan. Think about it. These babies and these children will go to Jannah directly, paradise directly, and they will not feel the punishment of the grave. They will not feel the punishment of the day of judgment, nor will they be going to hell. They'll be going directly to heaven. So yes, their life has been cut short here, but they'll be going directly to heaven. This is something that atheists cannot give these children. For atheists, these children are going to turn into worms and they're just going to perish, and that's it. They don't get a second chance. In Islam, they get a second chance. They go to heaven, they go to paradise. And I don't care if an atheist says, oh, well, I don't really agree. I don't believe there's a heaven or a hell. I don't believe that there's a paradise. I don't believe, God rewards. I don't even believe these things exist. Well, put that aside. I don't care whether you believe it exists or not. Our theology believes it exists. Okay? So, in our theology, we believe that these children are going to get a reward. So how can you criticize us for this? And you cannot even prove it doesn't exist. Can you? Can you prove it doesn't exist? Well, you'll say with a circular argument, well, you prove it exists. Well, we can prove the Quran. We can prove that it is a testament of truth. We can look at complex elements in design. We can look at the universe and see that it's been orchestrated by a creator. You can see the signature of design in all of these elements. Even Richard Dawkins, an outmost atheist, has said that he can see the signature of design at even molecular level, molecular biological level, right? So we can put our faith on that, but regardless whether you believe it or not, our belief system believes that these babies will be given a second chance. But what have you got to offer, you atheists? You got nothing to offer except that these children are going to turn into worms. So your theology, you look at our theology and say it's cruel because God allows these babies to die, yet your own theology is so much more crueler because these children don't even get a second chance. So who are you to even speak? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, and we know this from the narration, about the suffering. Allah will take the person who suffered the most in this dunya. He'll be dipped into Jannah, and he'll ask, do you remember any suffering? He'll say, no, Ya Rab. No, Ya Rab, because Jannah will be eternal bliss. He won't remember the calamity and the trials and the suffering he went through. And a person who lived like a king in this universe, who lived with the greatest bliss. He never felt hunger or pain or suffering. He lived the good life. Allah will grab that same person, dip him once into Jahannam, once into hellfire, and take him out and say, do you remember any good? He will say, no, Ya Rab. He doesn't remember none of the good. He can only feel the punishment and the pain now. This is the recompense. This is the situation we're facing now. So when these atheists complain, oh, look, this child went through such suffering, it wasn't given a chance. You know, your Allah was so cruel. When that child will refute you on that day and say, I felt no suffering, I felt no hardship, today I'm in Jannah, today I'm in paradise. What are you talking about, you atheists? I went through no suffering. I went through no calamity because today Allah has compensated me and given me full bliss, eternal heaven, eternal paradise, which you atheists cannot give me, but Allah is so merciful, He's given it to me. I bless you. Have a great day, guys. Thank you.